Welcome to this how to use a bracket placement module training video. My name is Henrik and I'm joined today by my colleague Christoph. Hello Christoph.
Hello.
So what you'll learn in this video is how to define a bracket placement project, also how you segment the model set and create reference planes, how you adapt and lock FA points, how you adjust and lock brackets on the patient's malocclusion, and also finally how you validate the project and make it ready for the design of the bracket transfers. So indirect bonding with the Ortho system. So the bracket placement module that you'll see in this video today is an add-on to the 3Shape Ortho planner, and it basically allows you to accurately place the brackets on the patient's malocclusion. For the bracket transfer module, that requires an add-on to Appliance Designer, and this is required for designing the bracket transfer media. But without further ado, let's go into Ortho Planner and see how the new bracket placement module works.
So I'll take it from here. So this is the Ortho Planner, as you might be familiar with it. Now we have a dedicated bracket placement button when the the bracket placement has been activated on your dongle.
Yeah, so this is a new icon in the 15 version.
It's a new icon and it's a completely new workflow that's just dedicated to the bracket placement. So here we have a trios case with the colors, and this is actually me landing at the end of the project, but I'm going to start from scratch. So this is the start of your bracket placement project. You have the option to choose either a bracket placement on the maxilla or the mandible only, or on both jaws. And that is of course because some treatments might require mixed types of appliances.
Right.
So for example, aligners on the upper or lingual brackets on the upper, and then vestibular brackets on the lower. So this is really a module that will allow you to place brackets on the vestibular side of the teeth of the patient and on the malocclusion. So what we mean by this is that there is no adapting to the arch or virtual setup functionality yet. It's purely on the malocclusion of the patient as he or she is at the start of the treatment. So the first step after the definition of your project, you're going to go into the segmentation for the upper. So this has been already done. This is exactly the same principles that we have used in the Ortho Analyzer and the Ortho Planner for many years now.
Yeah, so for those users that are familiar with segmentation in Ortho Analyzer and Planner, this is exactly the same.
Yes, and we have a dedicated video to explain you how to do it. I'm just going to go back to the top of the process here just to show how these are defined and to explain how actually the relationship between the different objects we have. So here we have a mesial distal point for every tooth, and that actually going to indicate the long axis of the crown. You can see here I can display it and I can adjust the long axis. So when you go all the way down to the end of the segmentation process, you have actually another option that allows you to change the long axis and the rotation center of the crown. And I'm just going to quickly run to this. Yes, so now you can see the teeth are actually segmented. I can easily remove the gingiva model from the dentition, and this is a confirmation that you actually have segmented your teeth.
Yep.
And selecting them from the template shows you the right long axis. I'm going to go to the next step, and that's going to be the lower jaw. And here I'm just going to show you an option that we have, because you might know that we can overlay DICOM data. So here is the gingiva model, and I can activate, for this case we have a cone beam data in DICOM, so that allows us to superimpose it.
Right.
And here this is going to be interesting for the bracket placement project, because that allows us to make sure that the long axis of the crown is somehow consistent with the root situation.
Right, and we have a separate video on how you align DICOM to your trio scan.
Exactly. So I'm not going to do the whole process again,
yes,
because we focus on the indirect bonding, but just so you know, you can modify it this way. And you can also use the cross-section planes, as we call them. So here I have the possibility to go along the arch. I'm going to take a back view here. I'm going to select the third molar in this case, and then I'm going to select it for real and then I can offset this cross-section plane here. So that allows us really to go and inspect the situation and modify the long axis of the crown according to the roots.
So basically the cross-section you have chosen follows the arch.
Yes,
now.
so this is the option here that we'll look at in another video as well. There's this option where you can follow the arch that has been defined by the mesial distal segments of the dentition. Right. So now I'm going to move on to the new features, because this is old news, I would say, but it is quite important that you keep an eye on the vestibular side of the tooth and to see how the long axis will be projected. And this is simply because this is the reference for the positioning of our brackets, or the FA points.
Yeah, makes totally sense.
So basically you're going to see in a second that what we're going to do is that we're going to be able to project this long axis on the vestibular surface of the tooth and determine what is called the FA point. So this is the step to which I'm going now, or after this one. This is the definition of the reference planes. So the idea is that we can define the occlusal plane. Again, this is the same tool we've had for many years. The difference is that this tool is really going to be used, this plane, if you will be used to have a fixed reference for the bracket placement. So this is really my reference plane for all the positioning work I'm going to do afterwards.
Yeah, so basically the first 4 of those 7 steps in the workflow bar on the top of the screen are familiar territory for someone that knows
exactly.
Analyzer. Yeah.
But they're just, being used for this specific purpose.
Exactly.
It makes sense in that context. So we have also the additional planes that everybody should know by now. Also the reference planes, the standard planes, whatever you call them. The idea is that you can create different planes. This one has a sagittal plane that we can use for symmetry, but it's also especially that when we position the brackets, we can choose different reference planes for the upper and the lower if we want.
Oh, okay, see, yeah.
So now I'm going to go on the step of the bracket placement. And this is the FA point. So you see to the left we have 2 steps. The first one is the FA point locator. And the FA point locator is really doing what we described before. That means it's projecting the long axis of the crown onto the surface, the vestibular surface of the crown, and then it's taking like halfway along the heights of this long axis to define what is called the FA point. So this is kind of like the ideal place.
So basically, based on your segmentation of the long axis, it tried to calculate the optimal point to place the FA. Yeah.
And this is of course a starting point. You can adjust this if you want to. You can move freely or along the vertical or the horizontal axis as much as you want. So I can, for example, just displace it a little higher up. You can see the previews here are also automatically updated, and I can reset it to the original position.
Okay, so basically the preview windows there, they update in real time.
Yes. The preview is always giving you a straight view from the vestibular side, from the side, and from the top. Another interesting aspect we have here is that the reference that we use for the previews is going to change the calculations of the measures that we receive on the previews. So here I have the occlusal plane. This is the plane we defined before as the fixed reference. And here, taking the view on the occlusal plane, you can see we have an expression of the tip and the torque of the selected tooth.
Yes, okay.
With regards to the occlusal plane. So this is also a way to express the malocclusion of the patient in absolute terms, which is also a new feature. And it's summarized in our, at the end of the process, we'll see, in the table that we have. So that really expresses the malocclusion of the patient in absolute terms. Whereas before we were just looking at the situation and then making movements in the treatment planning process, for example, that were like all deviations from the malocclusion, but the malocclusion was like the 0. Just a little comment about this, but this is also a new, additional information we get about the, clinical information we get about the treatment.
And you can have multiple reference planes, I guess.
Exactly. So this is the first one that came up in the list is the occlusal plane, but I can choose what we call the tooth edge plane. And this is really going to give me a straight view,
right,
which is parallel to the long
And I guess
axis.
many users will prefer this reference plane.
Yeah, so this reference plane will be used, you'll see at the next step, mostly for the positioning of the bracket. But this is an indication because we have some prescriptions for the brackets according to different doctors, where you can have a fixed, value or distance from the incisal edge or the gingival edge.
Yeah.
We actually return both.
Okay.
So this is really this guide that you can use to place the brackets according to some fixed prescriptions or recommendations. So again, at this stage, we're looking at the FA point. So the occlusal plane gives a nice, it gives some good information about the malocclusion, about tip and torque, especially. Here you can see we have a little more torque and especially more tip. And then I need just to validate or lock all the different points. So if I'm happy with the positioning of these points, of course I need to review them all the way around the arch to make sure that my long axis was correctly projected. And then I can simply lock my points. When I lock them, they turn green. That means I'm able to go forward to the next step, and that means I'm going to be able to add brackets on the upper jaw in this case. So I'm just going to remove the lower jaw, and we're going to look at the upper jaw first. So now the brackets have been placed. This is the bracket library list. As you might have heard, this list of brackets is always available, like updated in our system.
Yeah, and there's a separate video on the new download center where you can get updates on bracket libraries.
Exactly. So then you make sure you always have the latest libraries, and this is where the system will tell you if there is an update. Then it takes you to the download center of the control panel, and they have a version number as well, which is unique, obviously. So in this case, I took the 3M library, and they are positioned by default on the FA points.
Yeah.
So they have been locked. I need to unlock them. So here you can have a look. This is on the molar. I can take this and I can move it around. And as I said earlier, we can keep an eye on the prescription value here by changing in the in the preview.
Very nice. Yeah.
So this is one of the very strong features of the system, is the ability to position the bracket on top of the surface of the tooth, but without any collision. So it's really trying to maximize the contact.
So there's collision detecting.
There's a real-time collision detection between the bracket and the tooth.
Okay.
So now I can try to optimize it. I have a number of other options as well. So I can, this is what we call the auto snap tool, but I have actually another option that allows me to remove this auto snap. So imagine that, for example, for this molar, we had too much rotation on the bracket. So I'm going to open these features
so you can
here.
disable the detection.
Yes.
Okay.
Of course, I need to unlock it. So it's the same principle as the FA points. When it's red, you can move it and you can activate it. And now I can disable the auto snap. So here you can see we have some controls that allow me to manually adjust the tilting and so on of the bracket. And if I really have a problem, because it happens with the molar brackets that they will not land properly on the geometry of the tooth for very good reasons, because this geometry can be eroded or kind of not matching the surface of the bracket, then you can just readjust it this way, and then you can go back and then re-enable the auto snap, and it's going to snap
very
back
nice,
on.
Very nice.
So it's always going to look for the maximum contact. And basically that's the idea. So I would also recommend that you take a good, different previews of your bracket placement on the malocclusion. In this case, on the upper, you can put also the gingival model. And then that means you're happy with your placement. Then you can validate or lock the bracket. So these are the two ones that I need to lock. And I can press the lock all. Now they're all green. That means I can move on to the next, and they will not move.
Right.
So that's also a critical aspect of of this system, is that to make sure that what you have locked is really going to stay locked. So the next step is going to simply be the same process on the lower jaw. There is an additional challenge with the lower jaw, except for the part where it disappears. It's like we typically have interferences with the upper jaw when we place brackets on the lower jaw. So I'm just going to have a look at how we can deal with this. So the locator of the FA points and everything is completely similar. Now they're all locked, as you can see in green. And I'm just going to remove these ones, but visualize these. So here we can see some outlines actually that indicate that something is going on. That means interferences with the upper jaw.
Okay.
And this we can control and confirm with this.
Yeah, see your point. Yeah.
And this is actually because I have enabled the show collision option right down here in the collision detection area or toolbox. So that really allows me also to quickly visualize where the problem areas are.
Yeah.
So what do we do when we have these problems? We have a different number of options. First of all, I want to make sure that I can optimize the placement of the bracket by disregarding the occlusion or the interferences from the occlusion, because this is really what matters, is like to make sure we have the optimal placement on every single tooth. So here we have an option actually that allows us to disable the collision detection to the antagonist. And this will do just this, because if I try to move my bracket now, I'm gonna unlock it, of course, so you can see it's green, it's red. Well, now I cannot move anything at all because it is inside in collision with the antagonist. So if I go here and I disable this feature, then that allows me to move it freely, but I still have the collision detection to the bracket.
Right. It will still indicate the collision
on the bracket base also. You know, I'm never going to collide on the tooth I'm moving it onto. So this is really a nice option to optimize your placement. And again, you can keep a look at the values to the incisal edge, like to get a positioning according to the prescriptions. That will allow me to do this here. So I could lock my bracket here, and now with this position, even though it's colliding with the antagonist. Here I'm going to correct the position of this bracket a little. We have a strong rotation, so I'm just going to put it a little more distally. And I'm going to lock it. Right. Okay, so now we have, let's say we have a project where the brackets are locked.
And can you use the virtual articulator while you are in this process?
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is the way I'm going to get rid of these collisions, because I have somehow an optimized placement on my teeth, is that I'm going to be able to use a virtual articulator. So we have the show collision here.
Right.
And I can open the virtual articulator that we have in the Ortho planner. And most of you are probably familiar with.
And again, we have a separate video on virtual articulator.
And so the option I have here, and this is also a new option in 2015, is that I can create a new occlusion. So I have the default occlusion, which is that one, but automatically I can also create a new occlusion for the patient. Right. So when I create this occlusion and I modify it, I make sure that I'm getting rid of all the different areas of friction, and this will actually kind of give an indication of how to, you know, position the patient in the right occlusion so that the brackets can be there simply. And in practice, the doctors will typically create some pads, you know, to create the space on the molars so that the bite can be open and the brackets can be optimally placed. So this is a good, an interesting feature here where you can go and lock, you know, you're gonna save this new occlusion as you want it, and now it's saved and it's in your list. Nice. So that's also that's also a new feature that's very practical for treatment planning in general, but also for this application. It's a great, it makes a lot of sense here. So I'm just going to go back to, I'm just going to close my virtual articulator, go back to my project, make sure that all my brackets are validated. And
Yep,
we didn't have the 7, by the way. This is the libraries that I've chosen. Doesn't have the 7, the bands for the 7. So this is why the brackets are missing here. And I'll go to the last step of this little workflow, which is the validation. And the validation, that really means that you can be sure that what you have chosen as a placement will be kept in memory.
So this is basically the doctor's stamp that this is now a validated case.
And this is very important when you want to collaborate, because as we've told you in other videos and in other presentations, the interest of all this indirect bonding toolbox is that you can work cooperate in different locations between the lab and the practice, for example. So sorry. So if you wanted to if you receive the case from the lab, for example, you want to control it, you might want to modify some of the bracket placement. Well, then you go onto the validation again to make sure that this bracket placement is going to be validated and taken into account for the transfer design. Another thing that you get, as I mentioned, you have a precise positioning table for the bracket summarizing all the positions, and also the prescription values for the malocclusion. Okay. Because these are the tip FA, these values are actually...
You see the bracket library and this is your prescription. Yeah.
So then this is ready to go onto the brackets transfer design in Appliance Designer with our add-on module for bracket transfer design.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Christoph, for taking us through this workflow. And this concludes the content of this training video. Thank you very much for your time, and please remember to check out some of our other training videos.
Thank you.